College football nerds, we're here talking Penn State. Good to see y'all again. We are happy to be back. We went a little bit quiet during the off season, a lot of crazy stuff going on, but we are back. We are consistently putting out content up until the season, so you won't be able to hear us shut up. You won't get rid of us. So we're going to talk Penn State. I got Josh with me, and y'all know what to do. Like, subscribe, do all that, but more importantly, in the comments, let me know what you think or what your prediction is this year for Penn State. Will they win the Big Ten? Will they make the playoffs? Or whatever you think they might do. Josh, we talked about Texas and their hump this year, not necessarily making the playoffs or winning a national championship, but they needed some hardware. They needed to have something more than a nice 10-win season where they yet again saw Oklahoma ship off to the playoffs and they play some nice bowl at the end of the year. I want to ask, what do you think Penn State's hump is, what their goal is this year? For me, I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that your goal or your hump is to win the Big Ten and to make it into the playoffs. It's not fair, not because they're not good enough, but because they're in the same division as Ohio State. This is like saying, Auburn, you're not getting over the hump and you're not going to have a good season unless you beat Alabama and make it to the playoffs. And I don't know that that's fair when Penn State could win pretty comfortably, I think, the Pac-12 or the ACC if you remove Clemson. So tell me, what do you think, just starting off, is it fair to say that their hump isn't necessarily to make it to the playoffs, but it's because of the division that they play in?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the hump for Penn State this year really is being in the playoff hunt late in the year. You want to go into November 23 against Ohio State and that game be a play-in game to the playoff, like have a road to the playoff. That's the hump, because that's where they haven't been. That's where they haven't been getting. Last year, that path was still there with a loss to Minnesota. You beat Ohio State, you're still a one-loss team, but they were behind the eight ball. They weren't a favorite. They weren't, a top 5 team. They were a team that could play themselves back into position. Penn State, to me, the real hump is to be in pole position going into that late season. Well, this year, I guess it's a mid-season tilt, I should say, with Ohio State. Last year was late. But, you want to be in that game in a position to control your own destiny. And it's, again, even this year, you'll be coming out of Michigan and Iowa going into the Ohio State game. Hopefully you've got some good momentum, at least from those 2 games, and you have solid wins. And then again, the rest of the schedule, you shouldn't be losing to Maryland or Rutgers. Nebraska's still in rebuild mode. And if you're a real title contender, you shouldn't lose to Indiana or Michigan State, given where those 2 programs are either. So I think the hump is 11-1. You can lose to Ohio State, and that's okay. You want to be like where LSU was a couple years ago, where Alabama was the one real thorn in their side. But I'll take it around and make another point. To me, the hump, that's the scheduling hump. But I think the performance hump's a little different, because they're recruiting now, the past 4 years are all top 15 rosters. And the change for Penn State is going to be talent-wise. And it was a couple years ago, they had the number 6 class. That's going to show dividends. Those are the third-year players. I believe that was Micah Parsons' class. It's those redshirt sophomores, juniors that really form the core of your team for both teams. And it's a positive and it's a negative. And I want to hear your feedback on that. But my view is, the blessing is that you're in the position now where you've got the guys that in the third year that are like Parsons, that you can have a first or second round draft pick kind of talent leading your team. Not like we talked about just a minute ago with Florida, where you get a senior in David Reese that's a really good player, leading tackler, but goes undrafted. But you get guys like that are now going to leave as a junior because they're so good, but they're going to be like a second round player. That's how you win big games consistently, or enough to win hardware in college football. The challenge for Penn State, and the thing that a lot of teams run into when they start hitting this level, is you have to do it despite the fact that you only have players 3 years. And you're not going to have a 5th-year player. You're not going to have that David Reese. You're going to have a 3rd-year player like Micah Parsons. And there's a lot of turnover on the roster that I think is reflective of the fact that the recruiting is getting a little bit better. And so those 2 things are always kind of the yin and the yang that fight each other. the thing that makes Ohio State and Alabama so impressive is their ability to succeed despite of it. But I know we were talking before, and you had some thoughts like related to Georgia about how difficult that challenge is and what that kind of may mean for Penn State.
Yeah, to me, there's a lot of teams out there that I think when they start getting really good remind me of 2017 Georgia. And this is a team that made it to the national championship game, probably should have won that game, gave Alabama all they wanted. That team was very unique in that they were mired in this 8-5 type mediocrity. And so they had a lot of really elite talent, guys that if that team the year before, instead of going 8-5, was 11-2, or 12-1 or won a national championship, those guys would have gone pro. They had a lot of seniors, artificially had seniors on that team that would have gone pro the year before, and they would have had real attrition. And Georgia, my concern for Georgia was what happens when these guys that are artificially there, that shouldn't be there, when you face real attrition. And we've seen kind of good and bad in that, where Georgia has been able to reload from a pure talent standpoint, but yearly attrition does hurt them, and it nicks them just enough to keep them from reloading enough to move them to the next level, which is to be consistently in the discussion for our national championship. I want to talk about the schedule a little bit and the positioning of Penn State nationally. You and I have been consistent on this show that we don't think you need to win your division to make it in the playoffs. We're not one of those. We don't, because to say that means that you don't think that two of the best teams in the country could be in the same geographical area, and I think that's nonsense. It's nonsense to say that just because two teams happen to be in the Southeast or in, the Big Ten East, that they can't both be two of the top four teams. So we saw this, I think it was 2016, where we both argued that Penn State or Ohio State deserved to be in the national championship or in the playoffs, even though they didn't win their division. A couple of things stand out to me because I think that in some cases, because Ohio State is so good, there's an argument to be made that Penn State could lose to Ohio State and still make the playoffs because there may not be, we think it's going to be kind of a down year for everybody else, there may not be three other teams that we think are better than Penn State. The concern I have is kind of like we've seen with Alabama in the past, outside of Ohio State, Penn State may not have the opportunity to show it, which means, and let me ask you this question. It's a two-part question. One, do you see a path for Penn State being able to drop a game to Ohio State, still make the playoffs? And two, in any of these scenarios, does this mean that Penn State throughout the entire year needs to be pulling for Michigan to be very good?
I do think there's the opportunity for Penn State to make the playoff with a loss, but I think it's going to be really hard. And without getting the particulars of it, as Daniel said, our viewpoint is, yes, two teams from the same division absolutely can be in the playoff. I don't see the conference championship as an absolute bar. But I say that also noting that every year is a unique thing. Don't look at what one team did in 2016 and compare it to what team did in 2017 and compare that to another team in 2018. How you make the playoff is largely determinant on what everyone else does. There was a year just a few years ago where Washington was a 3-loss conference champion and lost their opener to Auburn, who finished 5th in the SEC that year. Those things happen, and that's what it sometimes takes if you want to get in. 2017, Alabama was very, very lucky. They would not have gotten in most years, but they happened to have that situation fall in a year where you could have a loss in your division and still get in. So I say that as a huge caveat. And I think Penn State does have a chance, but the question is, what all has to happen? Given their schedule, I don't think they're going to get in over another one loss. I mean, they're going to need a 2-loss conference champion to be in play, which means you need...
Or a 3-way tie, Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State.
For the
fair
division. Enough. 3-way tie, I think, would cause another part of the conversation. But even there, if there were 4, let's say Oregon, Oklahoma, Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State all have 1 loss or less, Penn State, even if they're only lost to Ohio State, they're not getting in. They're going to be, whatever that, I think in that case they'd be the 6th team. They're not going to get in over that list. So they probably need a 2-loss conference champion to be able to get in with the schedule. If Michigan's really, really good, it's going to help. It's going to help a lot. Ideally, though, I think you need 3 or
Is
4.
this a case where the out of conference schedule might be hurting them a little bit?
I think it is. I mean, Kent State, Virginia Tech, and San Jose State is not a strong out of conference schedule. Now, it's not really entirely their fault. Virginia Tech is a named team. I'm not sure. I should have dug this up before, and usually I do, but Virginia Tech, maybe that it was scheduled far enough in advance that they were good, but I'm guessing not, because they really, I want to say it was probably about 2014 when they started falling on hard times. I know they haven't been particularly good since really in the past 10 years. They haven't ended up finishing with a great record. So it's not what you want, right? And I know you don't have the SCS team in there, but the question is, do you have marquee wins? And you're probably not going to get the opportunity to do that this year with those 3. I still like the fact that you traded Pittsburgh for Virginia Tech. I get why they played Pittsburgh. I'd rather see them play someone other than Pitt. Pitt is historically plays Penn State very tough, and I get why you respect the game because of that. But on a national stage, Pitt is not a good enough team to get any clout. They are not a particularly good team, and just because someone plays you tough doesn't mean that you're going to get any national clout or recognition in the playoff hunt for beating them. But I do think Michigan is. It's unclear. Maybe somebody else comes out of the Big Ten. It's better than expected, but Michigan's definitely their best opportunity. I think it's kind of a shame that Penn State doesn't, for example, get Minnesota or Wisconsin on the schedule this year, because they really could use that bump out of the other division. And their opportunities, really because the interdivisional schedule, are pretty limited.
It's a double-edged sword that we just got finished talking about with Alabama, in that, you want some of those 15 to 25 or 10 to 25 ranked teams that any top team is going to beat, but look good as a notch on your belt. And so it's like, yeah, we don't get a Wisconsin or a Minnesota, so it means we're gonna have a clean record at the end of the year, but it gives us such limited margin for error. Let's talk a little bit about personnel, and overall talent, and how their talent compares, because I think Penn State has proven, Franklin has proven, while he's been there, that he can coach guys up. And we hear a lot about that, but my concern a little bit is the overall talent level. When you have to move from being, hey, we're a 10-win team, and we might, because the best team in the conference is going to the playoffs, we might go out and win the Rose Bowl. To move beyond that to the next level, you have to be competing with teams that are recruiting on an astronomical level, that reload year in and year out, that can lose 7 players on one side of the ball and not skip a beat, like an Alabama or Ohio State. We were super high on KJ Hamler, and I thought it was pretty amazing what he could do in that offense when everybody in the building knew that when they needed it, he was getting the ball. But it said a little bit about the rest of that team, at least from an offensive weapon standpoint, that scares me. If I'm saying, okay, he's gone, and Clifford's still there, but this was an offense that stubbed their toe a lot last year. Offense, defense, are you a little concerned that they don't have these top line players across the board returning, but the expectations are more commensurate with a team that is reloading and not necessarily rebuilding in certain parts of their personnel?
I do have concerns with Penn State taking another step forward. I mean, last year was an 11-2 campaign. Improving from 11-2 to 13-0 or 15-0 is a big jump. And I think something that's difficult for maybe fans that aren't fans of blue blood teams or blue blood fans to understand is the gap in college football between being a top 10, top 15 team to being a top 3-ish team, the true elite teams in a given season. We don't throw that moniker out very often. We usually say there's only like 3 to 5 in a given year. Most years it's more like 3. And those teams usually, like you say, recruit at an astronomical level or recruit at a very, very, very high top 5 level. and are extremely senior laden, but usually it's consistent top 3 recruiting classes. There's usually a few teams like that around the country. Penn State is not quite at that level. So we said there's one number 6 class. For the most part, it's been top 15 classes. That's enough to get you in the discussion and get you noticed, but it's something to build off of to hopefully get more recognition and get momentum in recruiting. It's not quite enough to get further. I think the gap, it's close enough that you could beat like an Ohio State in a one-off. The problem in like a playoff scenario is then you're going to have to beat, win a Big Ten championship game, then win a playoff game, then win another playoff game. So we sometimes get blowback on this. When we start looking at you as a playoff contender or evaluating at that level, we get a lot more critical because the difficulty of beating a Clemson and an Alabama is a back-to-back is a whole other ballgame than even going 11-1 or 12-0 and winning your conference. It's really, really hard to play with those kinds of teams. And what I see from Penn State right now, quite frankly, it reminds me of a lot of what 2018 Notre Dame looked like, which is you saw them against Clemson in that game. And Notre Dame, you could see them and say, I understand why they're in the playoff. I get why they should be here. But in terms of a team that can realistically win these two games, they don't necessarily belong. Like they're outclassed. They are not on the same level offensively and defensively, talent-wise. They looked pretty good defensively, but they still got burned a number of times to blow the game open. And then offensively, they clearly didn't have the firepower. And I think that's a fair comparison here. I think defensively, Penn State is going to be able to play with just about anybody in the country. You've got guys like Tony and Parsons that are top-level players. Parsons is an elite talent, the kind of 5-star, top 5 overall recruit, junior that Ohio State and Alabama you leverage to get the kind of teams that they've had in recent years. The defense has got a few of those guys. They don't have enough of them, whereas the other, Clemson and Alabama and Ohio State are going to have like 7 5-star defenders that are going to play meaningful time. Penn State doesn't have those kinds of numbers. But they're going to be more than good enough due to the experience level they have, and they are very well coached, I will say, to be really good. And again, like the returning starters, Castro Fields or Wade or Parsons, Tony, they're all really good returning starters. And again, you've got a lot of third-year players that are going to step into it. My problem is with the offense. The offense returns 8 returning starters. There's different ways to count it, but 8 returning starters effectively. And you've got good players in Dotson. You've got a good player in Sean Clifford. You got a really good tight end, I'll say, in Freiermuth. But, as much as Journey Brown is a really good running back, I don't know that he's a game changer running back. That's a high bar. Not many are. He'll be one of the better players in the conference, but only a couple players nationally can really take over a game at that position. You can have game changers at quarterback. I think Clifford is a good quarterback. I do not think Clifford is a game changer. He was, I think, 22nd in the country in yards per attempt. He was 27th in the country in QB rating. That's good, but if you want to be winning a playoff game, you really need a top 15 passer. I don't think Clifford's there. And again, Dotson's a good player, but I think it's just as important to talk about KJ Hamler and how good he was for Penn State that you were talking about a second-round draft pick. And a second-round draft pick is a really, really good player, but he wasn't quite T. Higgins. He wasn't quite Jerry Jeudy that could take over a game. He was a really, really good player, and the gap was pretty apparent. I don't see them taking a huge step forward offensively. That's why I think they're going to be a lot like Notre Dame was a couple of years ago, a team that in a lot of conferences could win the conference and make the playoff, but I think because of Ohio State, they're definitely behind the 8 ball. And if they were to be in the playoff level, I think the limitations in terms of firepower offensively are going to show. They don't have those multiple 5-star explosive players that you need to succeed at that level. At least that's what I see on paper. So you're looking at merely like an 11-win season for Penn State, or win the bowl and you go 12-1. I think that's a great season. But winning the conference is extremely hard with Ohio State in the division. And the hump they have to get over is just tough because they're going to have to get twice as good to go from where they are right now in terms of record to just winning 1 or 2 more games is going to take a massive improvement in quality. And that's the tough position Penn State is in.
All right, so I want to run through all of the divisions in Power 5 football. just to shine a light on how maybe unfortunate it is that Penn State is in the division they're in. You tell me win, lose, or challenge for the title of that division. And we'll start in the Big Ten. Big Ten West, win, lose, or challenge?
Win.
Big Ten East.
Lose.
ACC Atlantic.
Lose.
And that's because of Clemson. ACC Coastal.
Win.
Pac-12 North.
Challenge because of Oregon.
Pac-12 South.
I'm going to say win over USC.
Big 12 doesn't have division, so Big 12 in general.
I'd say challenge.
SEC East.
Challenge.
SEC West.
Lose.
All right, so that's interesting to me. There's 3 divisions in all of football that we think Penn State would lose, and it's because of Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson. Nobody else are we saying is clearly head and shoulders above a Penn State. That's wild to me, and it shows you just how, like, this is where maybe the 18 playoff advocates have an argument, because there's a team that's this good that is just edged out because of just a few teams. But that also, Penn State fans, shows you kind of where we think your team is, and what that next level is for your team. I mean, it's not a bad thing to be candid and say we don't think you're going to win the national championship this year, but it's kind of a badge of honor and a compliment to say that you're right there. And for us, I think if we saw a little more consistency at just top level recruiting, you would be there, because we love the coaching staff. We love what they're doing up there, and just need a little bit more to eke it out. But that's going to be it for us on this preview. We've got a lot of other Big Ten content coming out, and also, other stuff around the country, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12 country. So check that out too. Thanks so much, y'all. We're so happy to be back. Y'all have a great week. God bless.